begin, if you feel comfortable, we're going to take a minute. You can close your eyes if that's okay with you. If you don't want to, I respect that. But I just want you to envision yourself in a scene that I was actually in just about 2 weeks ago. And so you're sitting in a room with a student who's about 15 years old, and they're fidgeting, they're talking too fast, they have a nervous laugh, their eyes are darting all over the room. And sitting across from them at the table are 2 police officers who happen to be plain clothes, and they're about to take a report. And in this case, the student was alone and asked for a support worker to sit with them. And so there you are, sort of not the person necessarily giving the report in this situation, but you're sitting there in the room and you're watching this individual struggle. Now I want you to think for yourself, how many obstacles did that student, that 15-year-old, have to overcome just to get into that room? And now I want you to think for yourself, you can open your eyes if you want to. Who did you envision the support worker was? Well, I kind of said it was me, so I guess it was female. But was there an assumption that the student who was about to report was male or female? And I think, my predecessor who just spoke, I think, did a nice deconstruction around, men also report and boys also report violence. But I think there's oftentimes an assumption that even the support person is female that gets the report. And we have all these biases that are just naturally present before someone even comes forward, of who we assume are the people who are coming forward to report sexual violence. And I mean, the statistics kind of, help us understand some of that, but there's always problems with statistics, and I'm not going to unpack that today. But I also think about it, if this student is there alone, did their family believe them? Are they not supportive? Were they even in the room? Did the student even tell their parents? And then not even just that, I've spoken to many youth who either distrust police and don't want to come forward to even speak with them and don't see them as allies in the reporting process. Or sometimes there's just a fear of going to the authorities, which makes sense when you're a young person or even an older person. I think there's also sometimes a basic fear of retribution, of what happens if I tell and then this person gets charged or investigated. And is someone going to then hurt me because I was the one who reported? And so these are just a couple of the obstacles that doesn't even scratch the surface of what goes on every day in schools. And the truth is, and the piece that I can never emphasize enough, that we see all the time in the Gender-Based Violence Prevention Office. So we do a lot of prevention planning in schools, but we also get called in when there's been assaults at times or serious incidents. And the one thing I notice is that if it actually gets to the point where a school personnel knows about an assault, it's a pretty powerful moment, because the truth is, we know the vast majority of our students do not come forward to professionals within school boards to come forward and ask for help or tell them that something's wrong. And if we do find out, I think we're actually just getting the tip of the iceberg in terms of reporting. And then if you've ever been in the fortunate position to be able to have someone trust you, that you can then go forward and report, to police or child welfare, wherever the appropriate case is. And most of my cases are under 18. That's why I'm talking about young people. But the truth is that what we know is that these people oftentimes are just, I've lost my train of thought, but there's just so much that happens in terms of having folks come forward to have to make a report. So there's, so what I'm going to go forward with here is that I think oftentimes another piece that comes up, and this is, I've seen a lot of the Triangle program, and a lot of the work we've done across the board as well in terms of LGBTQ identified youth, is that sometimes I've had students come forward and say, I don't want to report to the police, because if I do, I have to come out. Whether that be that I use a different name than what's on my legal identification card, or my gender representation doesn't actually look like what my legal, designation is that I put down. And so there's actually a coming out process in addition to having to come forward with other pieces. And oftentimes, sometimes police officers are not always the friendliest. in terms of supporting LGBTQ youth. And we've had a phenomenal relationship with the LGBT police liaison officer who will actually really help guide some of these investigations if things don't go forward. So there's always an avenue for recourse. But we don't want people to have to report 3 times by the time they have someone who will actually listen to them. And that's what happens sometimes. The other piece I also want to mention was, if you've actually supported someone who's gone through this process, what we see oftentimes is that nothing may happen. They may have told their story. Maybe they even go to court, right? And they've given, closed circuit testimony on camera. But then, it doesn't necessarily lead to a conviction. And so I think oftentimes, and there are times where people don't want to go forward with the process because it's too daunting, and they don't want to have to tell their story 7 times, or a parent may not want to have their 5-year-old, child have to be cross-examined by a defense lawyer in open court while the alleged perpetrator is sitting in the room facing them. And so when you think about what are obstacles of reporting, they're very real, and they're real for many people. And I know they're based on statistics alone, they're probably real for people in this very room today. So other pieces that I just sort of wanted to mention too, and this came up in the morning panel, and I also want to address it. One of the presenters talked about how there was a youth who had reported to her teacher as well as the principal that she had experienced sexual violence at home, and they said, no, we can't report or do anything because we're concerned about your safety. And so I just wanted to take a moment to actually clarify what the school board's policies are, because they're very clear actually, and I know we have a couple school social workers actually in the room today, so they would be very familiar in doing these presentations for school staff. So all school staff across the school board have to receive training around child abuse and neglect and how to report, as well as sexual misconduct. And so if someone is abused and they're under the age of 18, or under the age of 16 and they've experienced sexual abuse by an adult, there definitely is a mandatory report to child welfare, to a children's aid agency. And then also if students engage in, even if they're same age peers engage in sexual misconduct, there's also clear reporting requirements in regards to kids who are 12 and over. The principal actually has to call the police, and the chief of social work and attendance would be notified. And for students who are under the age of 12, there's other measures that take place based on our procedures, but there's still a reporting requirement. And so it's not okay that that teacher and that principal told no one. It could be that we don't know who they told. Like, it could be they made a child welfare report and CAS said, don't say anything to anyone. But if that does ever, I know we have a lot of community service professionals in the room, if that ever does happen and you're working with someone and they said they told someone at school and then nothing was done, that actually is a direct contradiction to our procedures within the board, and it's not okay. And I would say you need to make a complaint. And if it's the principal that did it, then you contact the superintendent. And there's always someone, the nice thing about working for a large organization, there's always someone to complain to. Okay? And I would want to make that really clear, because we don't want adults and our parents not to come forward thinking that the school's not going to do anything, because we have really clear requirements on that. However, we also know that based on student census data, we have about 20%, maybe 30% of kids feel comfortable talking to school professionals about their problems. So schools need to do a better job, for sure. And we definitely see this. In terms of the title of today's panel, I know we were talking about barriers that youth experience to reporting, and I sort of focused on the police reporting piece, because that's often like sort of the authority, and within our own procedures within the Toronto board, that's kind of who we go to report. But I also want to mention that sometimes reporting can be sort of anything that's a little bit more informal. And so within a school setting, as a school social worker or a staff, if someone came forward and reported something to me, I have to report to an authority. But I know students sometimes get a report from a friend of theirs, or it could be that a student even goes home and finally has the courage to tell their parent that they had experienced sexual abuse when they were younger. And I think this may classify as reporting too, and even those steps can be very brave. And sometimes safety strategies that families develop on their own or informal supports develop can sometimes be enough to really help people feel a bit safer, whether it be physically, psychologically, emotionally. So yes, I do believe that our schools need to do a lot better, but I also believe that our society needs to do better. And our schools, our 600 schools that the TDSB represents, they're really mirrors of the society and the communities in which these schools exist. And so we need to change. It's a great platform to make changes, but we also need to all work together. Because I've heard from multiple students that, even if it's, something along the lines of, I think it was already addressed, but if I'm a boy, I don't want to go to this women's sexual assault program to report that I've been assaulted. Or, if I have to come forward and give a forensic medical exam, it's almost like having to come out that I'm gay because I was raped by a man and I'm a boy. Or sometimes it's, there's just so many pieces that come forward. And also, someone mentioned this morning around heteronormative assumptions. So that's sort of the idea that men and women exist, and only, if you're a woman, then you like men, and you sort of conform to most gender sort of stereotypes and sort of this sort of narrative around that, and the same goes for men. And so sometimes I find some kids say, I go into a hospital to report something, and I'm a girl and they're asking me about my boyfriend, and I don't have a boyfriend, and right from the start I already feel like they don't understand me and they're not going to listen to me, and I don't even want to go forward. So it's like sometimes working with youth who don't want to go forward and report anything, sometimes we have to talk about getting just medical attention, and the way they do that is really through, speaking to, okay, so don't report that, but you need to get checked out. And how else can you just do this in sort of a harm reduction kind of philosophy? That's more of like a counseling edge to it. So there are many, many barriers, and it's really hard to cover this within a panel presentation, but I do think, and this is something that I'd spoken to Andrea about before, that I feel really passionately about, because I think there's so many factions in so many different communities, and there's so many different pieces in terms of race, class, gender, ability that gets in the way of reporting sexual violence. I want to actually end with one final quote, and it's something that I've thought about a lot in terms of, and I'm really speaking today, and this is more directed to sort of people who are working in a more of a support role to individuals who survive sexual violence. But there's sort of a famous quote by I don't know why I'm bringing a rabbi, but I just happen to like it. And he sort of says, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? And I often think about this because I have to be honest, I am the first straight social worker that the Triangle program has had. And I often, I've taken on, within our office, I originally came because of the work that I've done within the sexual abuse community and sexual violence. And we do a lot of work around homophobia and transphobia. And I've actually realized that, it really doesn't matter, where you're coming from and where you're situated from. But the truth is that we have to support other people. And if you have lived experience of sexual violence or you don't, in terms of helping someone else, it doesn't matter, but you need to be there for other people. And I think this is the message we need to bring to our larger community to really make a change. Thank you.